A first view settles on the desk before anything else. A pale page rests on a sloped board, its surface quiet and faintly luminous in lamplight. Beside it sits a small vessel of dark ink. A narrow flame holds its place without hurry, making a small circle of brightness on wood, skin, and metal, while beyond that circle the room loosens into softer shadow. The farther shelves are only shapes. A beam overhead is only a darker line. Near at hand, though, the page is clear, and the ruled order of it can be felt even before the eye follows each line. Before printing spread from shop to shop and made many copies from one setting of type, a book often came into being in this slower way, one copy at a time. It began not as a stack of identical pages, but as a single prepared surface waiting under a steady hand, then another surface, then another. A manuscript was never only the words it carried, though it carried them carefully. It was also weight and texture, edge and margin, a made thing that could be held, stored, opened, closed, and used. Language lived in it, but so did labor. Ink on parchment was both meaning and mark. The desk itself suggests the shape of the work. Its slope lifts the page slightly, enough to bring the writing field nearer the eye. The body that lays there does not need to announce itself. It is present in the arrangement of things, in the nearness of the ink, in the space left for the hand to move. Nothing here is elaborate for its own sake. A simple order is enough: page, light, pen, knife, ink. The quiet is measured rather than empty. It is the kind of quiet made by repeated attention. During the fuller part of the day, daylight would have been welcome and often preferred, falling from a window across the desk with a broader and steadier clarity. The page would have received that light evenly, and the eye would have worked with less strain. But the day has edges. Morning begins before the room is fully bright, and evening lingers after the sun has withdrawn from the window. At those edges, lamplight or candlelight extends the useful hour. It does not replace daylight so much as accompany it where it thins. The flame near the writing surface offers enough, not a flood, only a modest field. Enough for a line to be seen, enough for ink on parchment to darken within the ruled space, enough for a steady hand to continue without haste. Around that small brightness, the room remains calm and partly withdrawn. It might belong to a monastery, or a cathedral close, or a school, or a later urban workshop where books are made with equal patience and slightly different habits. The exact walls matter less at first than the fact of organized work. The older word scriptorium can hover here without needing to harden into one fixed chamber. Sometimes it was a room set aside. Sometimes it was more nearly a practice, a way of arranging labor, tools, pages, and time within a larger house. What joins these places is not one architecture but one kind of care. A text is present, a blank page is present, between them the hand moves. The page has already been prepared for order. Margins hold back the text from the edges. Lines guide it into a block that will sit evenly on the surface. Even before any sentence is completed, there is a frame waiting to receive it. This quiet geometry gives the page its composure. It helps the eye return to the same place, line after line, and it gives the words a visible dwelling. A manuscript is a vessel for language, but it is also a visible arrangement of space. The pale page on a sloped desk carries both. There is no need for event here. A hand dips, lifts, and settles. The nib touches down. Ink on parchment leaves a dark line that sinks into the surface and remains. Then the hand rises slightly and moves again. Such motions are ordinary, but they gather consequence through repetition. A page fills not by sudden change, but by many quiet returns. The eye notices proportion, spacing, the evenness of letters, the distance between one line and the next. Patience is not something added from outside. It is built into the work itself. Regularity, visual care, and a practiced steadiness are simply the conditions under which the page becomes legible. Attention drifts no farther than the reach of the hand, toward the nearby things that make such work possible. The cut quill, the small knife, the ruled surface, the ink waiting in its pot, and the gathered materials arranged within easy reach. The nearby things are plain enough at first glance, and because they are plain, they can be looked at for a long time. The pale surface of a prepared page rests on the desk with a faint firmness to it, neither cloth nor wood nor paper exactly, but something made by patient treatment into a surface willing to receive ink. Beside it, in the small circle of lamplight, the ink pot keeps its dark stillness. A feather shaft lies near the hand. A knife gives off a small glint and then becomes quiet again. Parchment carried into the room a longer, earlier process. Animal skin had first been soaked, then scraped, then stretched on a frame and dried under tension until it became a workable sheet. That earlier labor does not disappear. It remains in the page as a faint memory of strain and smoothing, in the evenness of the surface and in the slight resistance felt by the pen. A prepared sheet can seem calm, but its calmness has been made. Even then, one side may not be exactly the same as the other. The hair side can be a little smoother in one way, the flesh side a little different in another, and the difference is often subtle enough that it belongs more to the hand than to the eye. Ink may settle with a slightly altered character. The pen may seem to move with a touch more ease here, a touch more drag there. These are not large changes, only small material habits of the page, the sort of differences a steady hand comes to know without hurry. Before writing begins, the page is usually given order. Margins are marked, lines are ruled. The empty sheet receives a quiet geometry so that language will later rest inside it in a measured block. This ruling does practical work as well as visual work. It keeps the text from wandering. It gives the hand a path to follow. It helps a long passage remain readable when the eye returns to it later, whether for study, recitation, or simple reference. In lamplight, these ruled lines may be faint, but they are present, guiding the dark strokes that will come after. Near the page lies the quill, most often taken from a large feather, perhaps goose, perhaps swan, its hollow shaft light in the fingers and its point shaped for use. It is a simple tool but not a permanent one. The nib wears down, the edge softens, the line changes if the point is left unattended, so the quill must be cut and recut, not once but many times, brought back to usefulness by a small practice trimming. The tool is alive to wear. It asks for maintenance in the middle of work, and the work pauses just enough for that. This is why the knife remains so near. The small glint of a knife beside the ink pot is not ornamental. It belongs to the ordinary order of the desk. With it, the quill is shaped, a fresh angle is made, a split is adjusted. The writing edge is sharpened again so that the line can keep its intended width and clarity. The same knife serves other purposes as well. If a rough fiber rises from the page, it can be pared away. If a small error appears, the surface may be scraped lightly and made ready for correction. One tool answers several quiet needs. Sometimes the page needs a little more preparation even after it has been made into parchment. A light rubbing of pumice or chalk or another fine dust can reduce surface grease and give the pen a better hold. The touch of these powders is dry and soft. They do not transform the page dramatically. They alter it just enough. The quill finds a little more grip. The line begins with less slipping. The prepared skin becomes more ready for repeated contact. The ink waiting in its pot has its own material history. Often it is an iron gall ink, made from oak galls mixed with iron salts and gum, forming a dark fluid that does not merely sit on the surface like paint. It enters the parchment more deeply, settling into it. The mark it leaves seems less laid upon the page than joined to it. In the lamplight, the fresh stroke may first appear wet and reflective, then lose that shine as it sinks and dries. In other places and periods, a carbon-based ink might be used, made from soot or lampblack with a binder, giving a dense black line of a somewhat different character. The materials differ, but the visual quiet is much the same. A dark trace on a pale surface, controlled by the cut of the nib and the steadiness of the hand. Nearby, folded gatherings wait their turn. These quires, made from sheets arranged and folded together, are the units from which the larger book will gradually be assembled. For now they are only prepared portions, edges aligned, surfaces still pale in places, some written, some waiting. Later they may be sewn and bound between boards, covered in leather or fabric, but at the desk they remain lighter than that future form, still closed to the stage of handling and arrangement. Everything here suggests regularity before it suggests expression. The ruled page, the trimmed quill, the knife, the dusting powder, the ink pot, the folded gatherings, all of them prepare the way for controlled movement. They ask for visual care and reward it. They make it possible for a line to keep its place, for a margin to remain clear, for one page to resemble the next closely enough that the whole manuscript can gather itself into order. With the page prepared and the tools settled into their familiar places, the work resumes in the simplest possible pattern. The exemplar rests nearby, close enough for the eye to return to it without strain, far enough that source and copy remain distinct. A glance gathers a few words or part of a sentence and holds them just long enough. Then the eye comes back to the fresh page. The hand lowers the quill. Another line begins. This movement, repeated many times, gives the hour its shape. Eye to exemplar, eye to page. A brief pause above the ruled line, then the small forward motion of the nib. The words pass not in a rush, but in portions that can be carried steadily. Language moves across the short distance between one page and another, and in that passage it becomes visible again, darkening into the prepared skin. Within the ruled limits, the letters follow habits older than the hour itself. A book hand has its own proportions, its own settled way of standing on the line. In one period the forms may be rounder and more open, as in Carolingian minuscule, where letters seem to rest with a certain breadth and clarity. In another, the script may grow narrower and more vertical, as in Gothic hands, where strokes gather close and the page takes on a denser texture. Whatever the chosen script, the hand does not invent each letter anew. It returns to known forms. The shape of an A, the height of an ascender, the spacing between strokes, the angle of entry and release. These are repeated until they become a visible discipline. So the labor depends less on speed than on regularity. A steady hand matters more than a quick one. Pressure must remain even enough that the line stays clear. The angle of the quill must be watched. Ink flow must be neither too heavy nor too thin. If the nib is too full, a stroke may swell more than intended. If too dry, the line may fade before its time. Between these two, the hand learns a middle course, and the page receives it. There are many small pauses, though none of them interrupt the calm. The pen is dipped, the nib is tested with a tiny touch, a stroke is drawn, the hand lifts, the eye returns to the exemplar, another phrase is gathered, another line begins. Over a long sitting, these motions become more familiar than any larger measure of time. Morning light may be preferred when it is available, falling more evenly across desk and page, but as the brighter hours soften, lamplight can keep the work within a smaller field. Then the visible world narrows, the page remains pale, the ink remains dark, the hand and the quill continue within a modest circle of light, while shelves, beams, and the farther parts of the room fall back a little. Because the work is so regular, small acts of maintenance belong naturally within it. A quill does not keep its point forever. With use the nib wears, the edge softens, the line loses some crispness. Then the hand sets the pen down, reaches for the knife, and restores the point with a few practiced cuts. This is not a separate task, but part of the same rhythm. After a moment, the writing resumes, as if the pause had been folded into the line itself. A minor error on parchment need not remain untouched. If a stroke goes astray or a letter is formed imperfectly, the surface can be scraped with care. The mark is lightened or removed, then the place can receive the corrected form. Sometimes a missing word is noticed only after the line has moved on. In that case, it may be added between lines or set in the margin where it can still accompany the text it belongs to. Such corrections are ordinary. They do not disturb the nature of the work. They belong to it just as surely as dipping the pen or following the ruling. As more lines gather, the page slowly fills its measured space. The block of text deepens downward between the margins that contained it from the start. One completed line supports the next. One page begins to resemble another. The rhythm of copying makes this resemblance possible, and through that resemblance a larger work can come into being without haste. Around that exchange, the place becomes easier to see. The sloped desk beneath the forearms is only the nearest part of a larger arrangement. Beside it, there may be a bench worn smooth by use, or a lectern holding an exemplar at a readable angle, or a small chest where folded gatherings rest in order. Prepared pages weight flat or lightly weighted. Nothing is placed for display. Everything is placed so that the same motions may continue without interruption. Within a monastery enclosure, the setting might be plain and serviceable. Walls hold in a settled coolness. Timber beams cross above. A window admits the best light of the day, and that light falls first on the nearest surfaces, on a pale sheet laid upon a sloped desk, on the dark mouth of an ink pot, on the edge of a knife, on the grain of wood polished by long use. Farther from the window, shelves and cupboards recede. They hold folded quires, loose leaves, scraps for testing a pen, perhaps finished gatherings waiting for the next stage. The room is organized by quiet use rather than display. Elsewhere, the work may belong not to a monastery alone, but to a cathedral precinct, where books are needed for worship, teaching, record, and study. A school offers another version of the same calm arrangement, with shelves, chests, and cupboards holding books and gatherings, perhaps with a somewhat different mix of texts and uses. Later in towns, workshops could support the same labor under somewhat different conditions, more closely tied to trade and commission, with materials arriving, gathering stored, and tasks distributed among more than one pair of hands. Yet even there the room remains one of measured work. A sloped desk still lifts the page. Shelves still hold what is waiting. Cupboards still keep tools and folded quires from dust. The practical needs are unchanged. Light governs all these spaces with a gentle authority. Daylight is the preferred companion, entering through windows and spreading more evenly across the writing surface. It clarifies the ruled lines, the slight difference between one side of parchment and the other, the exact place where a letter should begin and end. The best hours are shaped by that window light. It reaches the desk first and most fully. It touches the exemplar, the page, the fingers, the edge of the quill. It leaves corners quieter. When daylight weakens, work does not suddenly become another thing. A candle or oil lamp may extend the useful hours at the edges of the day, but its light is smaller and less even. It gathers itself into a modest circle around the page. Within that circle, the ruled surface remains legible, the next line still possible. Beyond it, the room loosens into shadow. The sloped desk is clear, the hand is clear, the mouth of the ink pot catches a little glow, while walls, cupboards, and stored gatherings become quieter presences. Because books often pass through more than one stage, the room may also hold a gentle sense of sequence. One person copies the main body of text in a regular hand. Another, perhaps later, adds red headings, enlarged initials, or paragraph marks that guide the eye through the page. In some books, a further hand may supply borders or gold laid over a prepared ground and polished to catch what light is available. Yet not every volume receives such treatment. Many remain plain, and their plainness suits the setting well. A practical book resting in a chest beside other gatherings belongs to the room just as fully as a decorated one. A sheet becomes part of a folded gathering. A gathering waits with others in a chest or cupboard. Several gatherings, once complete, can be sewn and enclosed between boards. Even before binding, the book has a kind of presence in the room. It is no longer only a page under a hand. It is also a small stack aligned at the edge, a set of quires tied or laid together, a thing that can be lifted, stored, carried a little way, then returned to its place. Within such rooms, very little needs to change. The same desk remains where it was, the same tools lie near at hand, and the same pale surface waits inside ruled margins. What changes is quieter than movement across a floor. A page that was empty in the morning holds a block of writing by evening. A folded gathering that was thin and separate comes to rest with others of its kind. The manuscript, still unfinished, becomes gradually more substantial, not by any single moment, but by the return of the same work under changing light. Some books could be made in a modest span, and some asked for much longer care. The length of the text mattered, and so did the kind of script required, and whether the pages would remain plain or receive headings, initials, or other additions. A large volume might ask for weeks, then months, and sometimes longer still, yet the passing time did not always announce itself. It was felt in the way ruled margins returned page after page, in the way the hand recognized familiar motions, and in the way folded gatherings slowly accumulated at the side of the desk. The exemplar remained open, the source page did not hurry. It waited with its own lines already formed, while the eye moved from that older text to the new parchment and back again. This motion, so small and regular, could continue for hours without needing to become anything else. A small pause between dipping the pen and drawing the next line. Then the motion repeated. Across many days, the pattern remained much the same, and because it remained the same, the manuscript advanced. No hand remained perfectly unchanged from first page to last. Small variations belonged to the nature of copying. A stroke might thicken slightly if the nib had just been recut. A letter might lean a little more on one afternoon than on another. A line might ask for a slight adjustment as it approached the margin. Corrections were ordinary companions to this steady labor. A minor error could be scraped away with the knife. A darker stroke might be written over a lighter one. A missing word could be placed between lines or entered in the margin with quiet precision. These were not interruptions so much as part of the page's making, small signs that the work was being attended to as it moved forward. As the days passed, the manuscript gained not only text but guidance. A heading appeared where before there had been only continuous lines. A rubric, perhaps in a different color, gave shape to a section. An initial marked a beginning. A paragraph sign helped the eye find its place. These elements emerged gradually, one page after another, one gathering after another, until the book began to show more clearly how it wished to be read. Many books remained plain and practical, and even there the page acquired order by these modest means. From those repeated motions at the desk, attention can drift outward without leaving the page behind. The same steady hand that lays ink within a small circle of lamplight is not working for the desk alone. The page is made to be opened again elsewhere. It will rest on a lectern, or on a school bench, or in a chest with other records, or on a shelf where many volumes stand close together. It may be lifted for reading aloud, or consulted quietly by one pair of eyes, or carried a short distance and set down in another room. The work remains calm and local while it is being done, yet the book itself belongs to a wider pattern of use. Before printing spread through Europe, this was the ordinary way many texts moved forward, one copy at a time. One exemplar gave rise to a new book. In that way, religion, law, medicine, philosophy, poetry, and the quieter language of administration all passed through the same narrow point: a hand, a pen, a prepared surface, a measured line. The kinds of writing could be very different while the physical act remained much the same. A religious text might be read in worship or private devotion, its order helped by headings, initials, and marks that guided the eye down the page. A legal compilation might be opened and searched carefully for a familiar section, the regular layout making return easier. A medical book could serve as a reference, sometimes practical rather than grand, with passages found again because the page had been organized to support use. A philosophical work might move through a school, while poetry might be read for memory, reflection, or simple preservation. Administrative writing, too, had its place: records, lists, and formal texts that needed to remain available and legible. Some manuscripts were richly adorned, but many were plain working books. Their value lay not in display but in service. A clear hand, a stable page, and a reliable arrangement of text could matter more than ornament. Rubrics in red, a slightly larger initial, a heading placed where the eye could find it, a paragraph mark set into the margin. These small forms of guidance helped long texts remain usable. They made reading steadier. They helped a voice find its place when reading aloud, and helped a reader return to a passage later. Once a manuscript leaves the copying desk, it carries with it the marks of its making. The ruled lines are still there beneath the text. A correction may sit between lines or in a margin. A word may have been adjusted, a letter reshaped, a heading added for clarity. Through repeated copying, texts were preserved across generations, though never in a perfectly identical stillness. Small variations could enter. Local habits of layout might appear. A correction in one copy might become part of the next. The language continued onward, and each manuscript carried both the text and the quiet evidence of having been made by hand. One copied book leads to another with very little outward change. An older page lies open as exemplar beside a new one, and the eye moves between them in the same measured way it did before, and will do again later in another room, in another season, under another kind of roof. A text continued not by sudden motion, but by being read from one surface and written onto the next, with dark lines answering dark lines across time. The continuity is easiest to see when it stays close to the desk. Ruled margins return from one page to the next. The lines are prepared, the quill is trimmed, the dark ink waits in its small vessel, and the steady hand begins again. A gathering of folded leaves slowly fills, then another gathering follows. Time is not marked by event so much as by accumulation. A finished quire placed aside is a quiet sign that days have passed. A penknife worn smooth by use is another. What changes over longer spans is often visible in the look of the letters. In one period and place, Carolingian minuscule offers rounded clarity, open spacing, and a calm regularity across the ruled surface. Elsewhere and later, Gothic book hands gather the letters more closely, drawing the text into a denser pattern of upright strokes and narrower forms, yet both depend on proportion, both depend on spacing. Both ask for practiced stroke patterns and a hand trained to return to the same shapes without haste. The appearance shifts, but the underlying labor remains familiar. Because each manuscript is made by hand, no copy stands in perfect stillness beside another. The words are carried forward, but they arrive with traces of the journey. A letter may be formed a little differently. Spacing may widen or tighten. A heading may sit higher on the page. A correction noticed in one copy may be entered into the next. A missing word may be supplied between lines or in a margin. None of this breaks the chain. It is the chain. The text survives by passing through material pages, and each page bears the marks of having received it at a particular desk, from a particular hand, under a particular light. This long passage of time can sometimes be heard almost silently at the end of a book. A colophon may rest there in a few plain lines, giving a name, a date, a place, or a brief note that the work has been completed. Such notes do not interrupt the larger quiet, they simply leave a trace. One scribe marks that a volume was finished in a certain year, another records a place. Another leaves only the smallest acknowledgement of labor brought to its end. These are modest signs, but they show how a single manuscript belongs to a much longer sequence. And then the book enters another kind of time, the slower time of handling, storage, use, and the faint where that settles onto surfaces and stays there. A surviving manuscript can be met first as a book that has simply remained in use long enough to show it. Its page edges are often a little darker than the middle of the sheet, not dramatically, only gently deepened by many fingers passing in the same places. The corners may be softened, no longer sharp. A page that was once turned carefully and then turned again over years of study or reading aloud begins to keep that history in its shape. The book rests closed between boards and leather, or sometimes fabric, and when it opens, the quiet signs of handling open with it. Inside, the gatherings of pages still hold together in their old order. Folded quires were sewn one to another, then joined into a volume firm enough to be carried, shelved, opened on a desk, and closed again. Boards give the book its steadiness. Leather keeps close to the form beneath it. Sometimes the stitching has been strengthened at a later time, and the repair remains visible without asking for attention. A seam may sit slightly differently from the first sewing. A thread may belong to a later hand. These are not interruptions so much as continuations, small acknowledgments that the book was worth keeping in working order. Many books that remain are not grand objects at all. They are modest volumes made for regular use. Their decoration may be slight or absent. What endures in them is not display but usefulness. Ruled margins still guide the eye. The text block sits where it was first planned to sit. Letter spacing keeps its old discipline. The page still carries the memory of a steady hand. That memory is often visible in small ways. A line may grow a little darker where the pen held more ink. Another may seem lighter where the flow briefly thinned. A stroke may press more firmly at the beginning of a word and ease by the end. None of this disturbs the page. It only lets the writing remain human and made. Corrections remain too. A scraped place may leave a pale patch where a knife lifted a small error from the parchment. An overwritten letter may sit slightly thicker than its neighbors. A missing word may have been added between lines, or in the margin with a small sign to guide it back into place. These marks do not suggest failure. They suggest care continuing after the first motion of the pen. Sometimes later readers added their own traces. A margin fills with a brief note. A heading is strengthened. A practical comment enters beside the main text. The book keeps these additions without losing its earlier form. Even after centuries, the surface remains present as a surface, not merely a support for words. It may have been opened in a choir, on a school bench, at a lectern, in an office of record, or on a table where one person followed the lines while another read aloud. Each use left almost nothing dramatic behind, only a little pressure at the corner, a little darkening at the edge, a seam strengthened, a margin filled. And through all of it, the first making remains near at hand, the measured spacing of lines, the calm evidence of a steady hand. Gradually, the larger uses begin to stand a little farther off. The choir, the bench, the shelf, the chest of records all grow quieter in the mind. What remains nearest is the page itself and the room returning around it. The room has already drawn inward to that smaller scene. Larger shapes are still there, but only just. A shelf becomes a darker band. A beam overhead is only a line of shadow. The chest near the wall has given up its edges. What remains clear is the sloped desk, the pale ruled page, the ink pot holding its dark surface, and the lamplight resting over them in a small circle of brightness. It is not the broad and useful light of day. That fuller light belongs to windows and earlier hours. Here the work continues at the edge of that brighter time under a more modest glow. The lamp does enough. It gathers the nearest things and leaves the rest to soften. The page is pale within it. The hand is warm within it. The quill passes into it and out again, its point darkened with ink. The page had been ordered before this moment began. Margins were set, lines were ruled. Even now, when the room has dimmed and detail has thinned, that order still shows itself. The text does not wander. It settles into a measured block. Stroke follows stroke, space follows space. A narrow interval between letters, a wider one between words, another small descent to the next line. The eye can rest in such regularity. The parchment itself is not entirely uniform. One side may seem a little smoother, another faintly different in its grip. Hair side and flesh side do not announce themselves loudly, but the hand would know. The quill knows as well, by the smallest drag, by the way the ink settles, by the slight change in sound as the nib moves. These are not large differences. They remain close to the surface, part of the quiet fact that this page is made matter as much as written language. Now the motion becomes almost everything. A glance to the exemplar nearby, a return to the new page, the pen lowered, the line drawn, a brief lift, another glance, another return. The movement is not hurried and not delayed. It is simply repeated until repetition itself becomes the shape of the work. The quiet return of the pen to the line says more than any larger account of time. Progress is here in one measured row after another. From time to time the quill is attended to. The small knife catches a little of the lamplight, then dims again. A point is recut with little ceremony. The nib is made ready to continue. Nothing in the room changes because of it. The page remains pale, the ink remains dark, the hand resumes its place, and the written line goes on with hardly a break in its rhythm. If an error appears, it does not disturb the calm. A tiny scraped place may lighten one spot on the parchment. A letter may be written over more firmly. A missing word may rest in a margin or between lines, modestly added, part of the page's material truth. Such traces do not interrupt the order, they belong to it. The manuscript carries not only words, but the faint signs of being made by repeated attention. So the visual world narrows further. The shelves are now only shadowed shelves, scarcely separate from the wall behind them. The beams withdraw into darkness. Whatever lies beyond the desk no longer asks to be seen. The lamplight keeps only what it can hold, the rim of the ink pot, the curve of fingers, the pale ruled page, the dark lines settling into it. A small circle of brightness is enough for these things. The room has already grown quiet. What remains nearest is the sloped desk, the pale page, and the small circle of lamplight where a steady hand still moves above the parchment. The brightness is not large, it does not travel far. It rests on the desk and on the page prepared long before this hour, a page whose margins were set in order, whose lines were ruled with care so that the writing may continue in its calm block from top toward bottom. Beyond that small field, the shelves and beams are only softer darkness, present without insisting on themselves. The room is still there, but lightly, as if it has folded back and left the page to hold the eye. The manuscript remains what it has always been here, object and language together. The parchment has its own quiet body, its grain, its slight firmness, its pale tone under warm light. It carries weight even before it carries words, and once the ink is laid down, the words do not hover above the surface. They enter it. The dark fluid settles into the prepared skin and becomes part of the page, part of its touch and look, part of the material calm of the thing itself. A steady hand returns to the same small motions, dip, a pause so slight it almost disappears, set the point down, draw a stroke, lift, return. The movement is controlled and modest, not hurried, not strained, only repeated until repetition itself becomes the shape of the work. The quill rests between fingers with a familiarity that asks for no notice. Nearby, the small knife lies quiet beside the ink pot, catching a little of the lamp light and then losing it again. It is easy in such a scene for time to loosen and become less distinct, not because nothing happens, but because the same action happens gently and again. The long history of copying does not need to spread outward. It can remain gathered into the nearest visible thing, a single line settling into the page, then another line beneath it, each one taking its place inside ruled order. The page shows that order quietly. Margins hold the text with calm restraint, spacing keeps the letters from crowding. The text block has a settled shape, neither wandering nor pressing too near the edge. Even in modest light, that structure can be felt. It is part of the restfulness of the page. The writing sits where it should sit. The pale ground receives it evenly. Daylight would once have been welcomed for such work, falling broader and clearer across desk and page. This smaller lamplight belongs more to the edges of day, when useful brightness narrows and the room begins to withdraw. It is enough. It does not try to become daylight. It simply keeps a little space open around the hand, the ink, the parchment, and the measured continuation of the line. The rest may soften. The rest may remain in shadow. Within that shadowed quiet, the manuscript seems almost heavier, more present. A gathering of pages waits with its own slight thickness. The sheet beneath the hand has a faint resistance, a dry softness prepared to receive the pen. There is the nearly inaudible drag of quill on surface, the touch of the desk supporting the page from below, the dark stillness of the ink pot, the warm edge of lamp light on the wrist and fingers. Surface, grain, weight, and touch remain when larger thoughts recede. Nothing more is needed than this continuity. A page receives writing. Another page had received it before. Another will receive it after. The older world of copying can rest inside that sameness without becoming empty. It is full enough in the small details, the pale page in a small circle of brightness, the steady hand, the shadow gathering beyond the page. The line continues, then pauses. The quill hovers for a moment above the ruled space, then lowers again. Another dark stroke settles into the parchment. The page holds it without effort. The lamp light remains small and warm. The desk keeps its slope. The room offers no interruption, only stillness around the narrow field of work. And so the scene grows quieter by staying the same. The hand comes to rest near the page. The light stays small and warm. Ink darkens into parchment, and the room fades by remaining still around it.